Welcome back to Ask Lee, and as always, ask your questions. If you have any questions regarding anything to do with magic and witchcraft, demonolatry, spirituality, anything, just leave a comment below with your question and I'll add it to the list of questions. Alright, so today's questions are quite an interesting combination regarding the ranking in the Infernal Empire of Demons and a question about Christ. So let's do that one then. Welcome to my channel. You are entering the world of magic and mysticism with your host, Lee W. Johnson. Keep the lights on and help improve the channel by becoming a supporter for just $2.99 per month. Hit the join button. Okay, so the first question is from Witchlight. How works the rank in the Infernal Empires of Demons? Can they gain rank or downgrade rank? I might not actually be the best person to ask this question of, and this came up in a discussion in comments to one of the other videos. I don't like the whole idea of hierarchy when it comes to the spirits. So I'll get a bit into that. But even I understand why people refer to the demons as the Infernals. I do understand it, but personally I don't like the term. I think it relates a little too much to Christianity because the demons are considered to be the inhabitants of the Christian hell, which is the infernal hell, the infernal fires of hell, and all of those references. And it doesn't gel with me. I don't really use the term myself. So the Infernal Empire of Demons, I wouldn't even use myself. But again, as I said, I do understand why people use the term Infernals. It's almost like taking back the term, just as we're taking back the word demon. But anyway, to move along. So this whole hierarchy thing, when it comes to the spirits. So if we were to divide the realms into three, we have the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. There is some overlap between all of this, so I'm not going to take that into consideration during this discussion. But just remember there is a lot of overlap. So one spirit can move between the realms. They're not confined to a particular realm or world. But if we were to classify them directly, then we could say that the gods are in the upper world, the fae, the otherworld beings, the land spirits, the land wights, the jinn, and all of those otherworldly beings are in the middle world, and then the ancestors are in the lower world. When we consider this, what we usually do is we place the middle world, the upper world above it, and the lower world below it. Makes kind of sense because upper, middle, lower. But because of this, we tend to think that the beings of the upper world are more powerful than the beings of the middle world, which are more powerful than the beings of the lower world, because we create this hierarchy, and hierarchy tends to, although the word hierarchy actually doesn't directly refer to levels or rankings of power, we do tend to give this reference to hierarchical beings being powerful or less powerful. But the ancestors are just as potent as the fae, and the fae are just as potent as the gods. So I consider it to be more of a case of different types of spirits from different types of emanations. It is easier to work with. If we were to consider the Jinn, the demons, to be in the middle world, and the angelic forces to be in the upper world, for instance, it doesn't mean that the angelic forces are more powerful than the demonic forces in the middle world. All it means is that the demonic forces, it's easier to interact with these demonic forces because they are, the middle world kind of overlaps our own physical world. So that realm is in the same space. They're all in the same space. The way, we could go off on tangents and everything else. So I'm trying to simplify this, but just remember that what I'm saying is not a direct inference. When we're talking about the worlds, they are all in the same space. They are not separated. They are all in the same space. So, but what I'm trying to get at is that the middle world we can consider to be in the same space as the physical world. It's two realms which are not quite in sync, but they can be brought into sync, so we can move between these worlds, just as we can move to the upper world and the lower world, so we can bring those worlds into sync with our own. This gets very difficult to explain when when you have to consider that in order to explain it, we have to kind of explain it as separate things, but they're not separate. As I said, just remember that it's part of the mysteries, okay? But we'll continue anyway, as best we can. So we have the middle world, and it's easier to connect with that world. So it's easier to connect with the beings with that world. In the upper world, there is a different type of emanation of being. So it's not that it's more difficult to connect with those beings, it's just that they have a different aspect. To try and explain this a little easier, let's see. Okay, I was going to explain this in terms of a company with workers and managers and CEOs and directors and everything else, but that's not going to work. Especially the way most CEOs and companies operate nowadays. It is a power struggle there. There's definitely a hierarchy of power. So that's not going to work. Alright, what I'm trying to get at is... let's take the elements. Okay. So if we take Earth, and again, when we're talking about the elements, earth, air, water, fire, and spirit, these are not actually directly connected with the physical things, but they can be. So if we take Earth, let's take a rock, okay? So we have a rock, and then we have a candle, and then we have some incense, and then we have a bowl of water. And this represents the four elements, okay? So we can tangibly touch the rock. We can touch it, we can feel it, it's cool in our hands. We can hold our hands around the flame of the fire. We can't touch it, it's plasma, but we can feel the heat from it. We can hold our hand above the incense, and I'm going to specifically say an incense stick here, because if you're using a charcoal block, you're going to feel the heat. We don't want to feel the heat. But we can interact with the smoke that's coming off the incense stick, and we can move our hands and the smoke will fold around it, but we cannot touch it, we cannot feel it, there is no physical sensation. And then we go to the bowl of water, we can feel it physically, but it's not solid. We can move it around. So we have these different elements that we can do things with. We have different sensations, physical sensations. Some are solid, some are not solid. So in a sense, it's the same type of thing. So we have the ancestors, which are a particular emanation. We have the middle world beings, the otherworldly beings, which are a different type of emanation. And then we have the upper world beings, which are, again, a different type of emanation. So they are all different emanations, but I do not consider them to be higher or lower than one another. You may get particular groups of otherworldly beings, and within those groups they are organized in a fashion where they do have a general or a leader or a CEO or something like that. Whether they lead in the same way as humans lead, in the case of the military, or in the case of a company with a CEO who do feel like they have all this power, I wouldn't say so. I don't think the otherworldly beings have the same ego that humans do. They're a lot older, they're a lot more stable. Humans are just largely on a power trip. So I don't think you'll find that in the spirit world. Having said that, you might. When it comes to the otherworldly beings, the middle world beings, they can be quite temperamental, and a lot of them hate humans. They just do not like human beings, especially when you consider land spirits that have been mistreated by humans for hundreds of years. They're not going to like them. So when you approach them, you have to approach them in a proper manner. You do not find that same type of attitude with the gods. It's a completely different attitude. But again, a lot of the gods have been mistreated, so you may find that some of them have that attitude. But as far as rank goes, I don't like this idea of ranking and hierarchy and things like that. It doesn't fit with me, it doesn't gel with me, it doesn't make sense to me. So I don't consider the whole thing of ranking. And as I said, I don't really like to use the term Infernals because it relates to something which is Christian, and I'm not Christian at all. Not anymore anyway. I've completely removed myself from that, and I wouldn't use the term because I'm not Christian, and I'm not anti-Christian. So it's just a religion that's over there. They can do what they want to do. That's their problem. So I don't really like those terms myself. I don't use them, but I understand why people do. Alright. So, yeah, I'm not sure if this answers your question. As I said, I'm probably not the right person to ask the question of because of my own personal viewpoints. So that's what I can give you, is my own personal viewpoints. Alright, so let's move on to the next question, which is from Martin Ainbinder. Who is Yahweh? Who is Christ? Is Christ separate from Jesus? I have heard that these entities can be opposed to demonolators. Thank you so much. Alright, so I'm not going to do who is Yahweh. I did do a previous video on Yahweh quite recently, actually. So I'm going to have a look for that. And there's a lot more to Yahweh than I mentioned in that video. So it's, if you do want to explore that, it's worth going down that rabbit hole and just checking out everything you can find. Who is Christ, and is Christ separate from Jesus? So Christ is a term, a word, a title, same as Buddha. And in fact Christ is the same as a Buddha, an enlightened being. So yeah, that answers the Christ part. It's really that simple. Christ is an enlightened being, and there isn't just one Christ, there are many Christs. So whereas in Buddhism we have Buddhas who are enlightened beings, there are many of them. There's not just one Buddha, there are many Buddhas. And although we don't actually refer to many Christs because of Christianity and Jesus being the Christ figure, there are many Christs, there are many enlightened beings. It's a term, it's a title, so that's really it for that one. Is Christ separate from Jesus? Jesus was a man who became an enlightened being and therefore became a Christ. Now, the interesting thing about Jesus is that the word Jesus with a J only started being used about 400 years ago. The original name was actually Yeshua, and through various translations, so Yeshua from the Hebrew, then translated into Greek, they had a huge problem because trying to transliterate the letters from the Hebrew into the Greek, and the Greek not having all of the letters, it just became a bit of a problem, and the letter I was used for the Y, or iota, and then from there it got translated into Latin, and the letter J only got introduced to Latin later on. So what you ended up with was the name Iosus, and which was spelled with an I, not a J. So, you know, we talk about Jesus Christ, but I don't think people actually know, you know, who Jesus Christ was. And I've seen a lot of arguments that Jesus Christ never existed because the Romans with their census, there was no Jesus Christ in the census. Well, there wouldn't have been, because the name Jesus didn't even exist until the early 1600s. You know, anyway, let's just, who was Jesus? Jesus was a man who became an enlightened being, and taught a particular thing. And I think we can take this in different directions. We can take it in the direction of he was the Son of God, and the beliefs of the Catholics, and such things. What we can also take in the direction of him being a left-hand parther, because he was an antinomian. He performed magic. He rebelled against the society, the mainstream religion of the day. Was he the Messiah? Not according to the Jews. According to the Christians, sure. And obviously that came about because some of the Jews believed that he was the Messiah. But generally in Judaism, it's not believed that Christ was the Messiah. The Messiah is still coming. But a faction of Jews did believe that this man, this enlightened being who was teaching God's word, was the Messiah, and therefore started following him. And out of the teachings that he gave, then Catholicism began in the 1st century. But, you know, so there's that overlap there. But, you know, if you really consider it, in terms of what a left-hand parther is nowadays, left-hand parther is an antinomian. They go against the grain of society. And they perform magic, and that's what Jesus did. He went against the grain of society and the mainstream religion of that time, and completely stirred things up, completely disrupted things. He was a disruptor. So he was a rebel. I think Jesus was fantastic. So does this, sorry, I just want to grab the question again. Further, that these entities can be opposed to demonolators. That can be questionable. In some regards, I would say demonolators will not work with Jesus or Christ, because Jesus and Christ are Catholic and Christian figures. But would those beings work with the demonolators? That's a different question altogether. I can't see why they would not. Try and put this as simply as I possibly can, because this is a discussion which could fill volumes. when we consider the demonic entities, the interpretation of them has been fixed and set by humans over centuries. I recently spoke about Leviathan, and if you look into the mythology of Leviathan according to the Hebrews, especially the Christians who continue that, Leviathan is a demon, is an entity which is trying to separate us from the divine, and therefore is causing us harm. However, if we consider Leviathan and the world serpent to be that aspect which is the physical atmosphere which separates our physical world from space beyond it, that is a protective shield. So yes, we have this story that Leviathan, the atmosphere, is separating us from the divine, because it's separating the physical from the divine, which is above the heavens, space itself. So if we take that story, just that particular part of that story, Leviathan separates us from the divine. Is that separation a good thing or a bad thing? It's a separation from the divine, therefore it becomes a bad thing, because we don't want to be separated from the divine. But if we remove that separation, we will die physically. The entire world will be destroyed. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? That I would consider a bad thing. Some people may consider it a good thing. So is Leviathan an evil spirit which is trying to harm us? No. Leviathan is trying to protect us from being destroyed. In some cases, in some people's interpretation, that destruction would be a good thing, because then we do not have physical bodies and we can move on to the divine. So it depends on interpretation, but all of those interpretations have been made by humans. Do those spirits have those same interpretations? I do not believe so. And I'm going to get, this becomes a very, very sticky topic. Cultural appropriation comes into this. And I don't really want to get into that because it's a difficult topic, and I am a supporter of not appropriating cultural things, especially spiritual practices. Anything really. We should not be appropriating from different cultures. However, the difficulty comes here in that the spirits from different cultures are working with people from other cultures. They are not defining those lines. So would Christ or Jesus work with a demonolator? I don't see why not. Christ is an enlightened being. Do we want to learn from an enlightened being as a demonolator? Yeah, sure. So why should we limit ourselves to only specific beings? If we consider a demon to be a divine intelligence, then an enlightened being is a divine intelligence. So yes, we do tend to focus on a particular pantheon, and this usually revolves around the ancient Middle East, so Egyptian, Sumerian, Mesopotamian, Babylonian, Persian, that type of area. We focus the pantheon on that area, and within that area we have the development of Christianity around, the ancient Middle East. So yes, we could definitely consider Christ to be a divine intelligence which we could work with. The difficulty comes in that that particular entity is associated with Catholicism and Christianity, which demonolators usually reject. Can you reject the religion and work with the spirit or the entity? Why the hell not? We are antinomians. Go against the grain of society. Fuck everybody. And if a demonolator tells you you cannot do this, fuck them, because we're antinomians. Just do it anyway. So, why the hell not? Okay, so I'm going to leave that one there because I'm going to get myself into trouble. Alright, so I will see you next week. Have a good one until then. Cheers for now. Bye bye.